Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about what makes a good story idea. I think there are a lot of opinions out there on the value of ideas. People will say oftentimes, idea doesn't matter, it's all about execution. And I think I used to go along with that because a lot of people say it, but to be honest, I don't really agree with that. I actually think idea can be really important. Obviously, idea isn't everything. A good idea doesn't magically create a good book. Execution is obviously really, really important. But I think that idea is really important too. And I kind of started to see this because a lot of books that I wrote when I was younger were fundamentally flawed in the ideas. There were so many problems baked into the idea before we even got to the bad execution. Execution is obviously so important. An amazing idea with bad execution doesn't really lend to a good book, but I actually do think ideas matter a lot. It's the whole foundation of why you're writing this book. It's the building blocks and the foundation for your entire story. Everything else is built on the concept. Ideas kind of happen in layers. You have the basic fundamental concept of the book, and then on top of that, you layer on general ideas about who your characters are, general ideas about your setting and the core conflict. And the ideas get more and more specific as you get into the finer and finer details of your book. At a certain point, we don't really call this the idea anymore. We just call these details of the story. The more foundational the issues in your story are, the more work you have to undo to get to them. So if you have problems in your basic concept or the basic ideas behind your characters, setting, world, and conflict, if you end up having to change that, especially in any major way, you have to basically undo everything above it. There were books I wrote when I was a teenager, and the main problems come back to the basic foundational ideas. And so in order to fix those books, I would have had to take apart literally everything and basically start from scratch, and at that point it just didn't feel worth it. To answer the question, do ideas matter? I think they do. And to answer the question, are there bad ideas? I think the answer is yes, and I think what makes a bad idea is it's an idea that doesn't give you the tools that you need to write. So let's talk about some of the qualities that I think make a good idea. Number one, and this is the most obvious one, is originality. Now, some people love certain tropes or certain story elements, and that's fine. People are like, I love these tropes, I want to read books that are about this, and that's fine. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that you need a 100% groundbreaking idea in every single book you write. There needs to be something that hasn't been said or done before. Even if you are working on a book that, maybe is generally a story that's been told before, there needs to be something about it that is original. When I come across an amazing concept, like in a book, that draws me in. I am compelled by really original concepts and concepts that are like, whoa, why has no one done that before? I think that having an original concept in many ways sets you up for success because you don't have to work as hard to make your story exciting and fresh because it's already there in the concept. Stuff that I've written that has, more quiet concepts that have been done before, I find take a lot more work to really make them pop because it's not inherently there. You have to find it in the details. It's a bit easier to make something just so engaging and fresh and pop when your basic concept that you're working from is super original, right? Sure, to a certain extent, people will say every story has already been told, and I don't really agree with that, but I think there needs to be some original aspect to it. Number two is that there's inherent conflict and tension. I think this is one of the most important things because conflict and tension are inherently what give a story motion. They're what make a story. And so if your concept doesn't lend well to forces of conflict or tension, then there's already a problem there. Sometimes this happens when your protagonist, the main concept behind your protagonist is a character who is incredibly skilled and the best at something. If they are the best at the thing that they need to do to the point that no one can rival them, there's no inherent tension or conflict behind this story because what obstacle will the character face that really means anything? Let's say you're writing a book and, your main character has a superpower, which is that they cannot be killed or injured in any way. Their superpower is that they are indestructible. I'm sure there are ways to play with this, but if you have a main external high-stakes plot where this character has to, defeat an evil force in a very high-stakes life or death scenario, well, there is no tension there because we know that this character literally cannot die. That is kind of an example of a conceptual flaw, though I am sure I'm going to get 80 comments on this video of people finding ways to make this work. As a general example That was the first one I could come up with off the top of my head. It's kind of an example of a concept that doesn't really give you much inherent tension or conflict because there isn't really any tension in this scenario. The key to making that work is having a storyline where the stakes are not life or death and rely on something else entirely. But if you have life or death stakes in a life or death plot where your main character is indestructible and cannot die, then inherently you don't really have any tension or conflict. The main character can basically just walk to the end and do whatever they need to do. Number 2, there's a built-in story engine or a sense of propulsion. So a story engine is a screenwriting term, and it's basically the thing that continues to generate episodes week by week and keep the story moving over a very long period of time. It's the element of the concept that enables episodic plot development. I'm going to use the example that I used this example in a Reedsy video, but that's why it's at the front of my mind, so sorry for being repetitive if you also saw that video. But a great example from a TV show is The Good Place. So, I mean, pretty much every TV show has a story engine. The Good Place is a very popular TV show, so that's why I'm using it as an example, and it has a pretty clear story engine. So the concept of The Good Place is that the main character, Eleanor, dies and goes to the good place, but then finds out there's been a mistake and she should have gone to the bad place, which is very high tension and very high stakes, of course, because the stakes and what she has to lose is that she will literally go to literal hell and be tortured for all of eternity. So very, very high stakes. The story engine is that she's going to continually be put in situations that threaten to reveal her secret, because the story's core theme is about, morality and what does it mean to be a good person. That's going to continually challenge her in a moral way. And so that's a story engine that continues to build plot episode by episode and also contributes to the themes. I think a good story has a natural story engine built in. It may not be as obvious as a TV show, and it doesn't necessarily need to carry you as long as a TV show, right? There's a sense of propulsion, there's a sense of fuel that is going to keep this plot moving until we get to the end. I think the next quality of a good idea is that it is a story and not a situation. This is something one of my writing professors would always say, and it was always, you knew it was bad when the prof would be like, this is not a story, it's just a situation. A situation is when you have people in a situation, but there's nothing there that actually makes it a narrative. So there's nothing being said about the characters, there's no sense of change or development, and there's no narrative arc. You just have people in a situation interacting, but there's no narrative purpose or development. Sometimes you end up in a situation, but you haven't found the story. Now, it's not like some ideas are inherently situations and some are inherently stories. If you have an idea that at the moment is a situation, you need to think about how to turn it into a story by giving it narrative arc. Usually that means giving your character a goal and something to be explored about this character, themes to be explored, ideas to be explored, so that there can be a sense of narrative movement. In a situation where you just have people in a situation, no one really has a goal, nothing is really changing or moving, there might be some interesting tension or maybe even interesting ideas brought up, but there's no sense of change or arc. That's when you just have a situation, and at that point it's not a very valuable idea. You can take a situation and add things to it that can make it a story, but if at the moment it's just a situation, it doesn't have that sense of propulsion that stories need. And I think that the last really important quality of a good idea is that it is logical. If there are inherent fundamental plot holes in your concept, it's going to be very hard to work with because the idea kind of doesn't make sense from the get-go, If you have a situation that just quite simply is not logical, is not realistic. Okay, so when I initially filmed this video, I couldn't really come up with an example of a flawed, illogical concept, and the only one I could think of was a story that I'd workshopped once. But I don't want to use an example in a public video that is someone's real work. That seems mean and unfair. So then I remembered a book that I wrote that had a completely illogical concept, and I think that that would make a better example because I can air my dirty laundry. That's fine. That's not immoral. When I was 13, I wrote a dystopian novel because it was the era of dystopian novels called The Winter Run. And because it was dystopian, it was set in the future and there was like a level of futuristic technology. And the main plot of this book is that the main character was in prison. And basically, there was no such thing in this world anymore of, a trial or a legal system. Such a thing didn't exist. So if you were accused of a crime, you would just go to prison, and if you wanted to, earn immunity from your crimes, then you could the doors weren't locked, so you could just run away, and if you made it to, a safe zone, you would get immunity from your crimes. But such task was
basically considered impossible because the safe zone was very far away, and you would basically be hunted by the entire military. Now, the main character of this book is one girl, one 18-year-old girl. Is she badass? Yes, she was an assassin. She could kill some people. It just makes no logical sense that one person, I mean, even though, to be fair, I think a lot of books at the time had the same flaw, but mine certainly had it to a pretty extreme degree. In what world would one teenage girl make it to a safe zone, which takes months? Like, this was a many months long journey on foot. In what world would she make it there when the people hunting her have, like, helicopters and, like, heat sensing, trackers, and they have tracking devices that, like, they're literally tracking her? It's literally not gonna happen. Like, they have a sci-fi level of technology. She's one person traveling on foot. It's just not gonna happen. And so the entire concept of the book was just fundamentally completely illogical, because it was just impossible that the main character would ever succeed at this. So eventually I came back to try and rewrite this book a few years later, which it didn't go very well, but one of the things that I had to do was completely strip back the world building, because it just didn't make sense. If I was going to have it in a sci-fi context, it was just impossible. So I had to basically strip back the level of technology and essentially make it more of like a medieval fantasy, where, they had like swords, everyone was traveling by horse, and there was no helicopters and no tracking devices and stuff like that. And I think that even though it still wasn't a super believable plot, that did definitely help. I had to strip back all of the world building and completely rewrite the book in order to fix a fundamental flaw in my concept.
Sometimes ideas just logically don't really make sense. There's something about them that just fundamentally logically doesn't make sense, and that will be very hard to work with. So those are some qualities that I think make good ideas. I think that what is a good idea is basically it allows you to write an effective story, and I think that these points brought up allow you to write an effective story. If you have all of these qualities, you'll have fuel to your story. If you don't have these qualities, it's going to be very hard to write the story, because the pieces that make a story work won't be there from the fundamental level. So that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.